Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Rose City Politics. We had so much fun last night that we decided to do it all over again today, and we wanted to dedicate a full episode to the budget because that happened. A whole lot of stuff happened. But first off, it's the 16th of December. We've got a full panel here today. We've got Doug Sartori. Doug, how you doing?
Doing really well. I've got
We've
my
got
budget themed wallpaper going on.
I like it. Explain to the people who can't see it what's there.
Oh, it is the municipal roundtable graphic from The Simpsons.
It's nice. We got Don Merrifield Jr. coming from the void. Don, how are you?
I'm very good, enjoying this lovely spring weather. Feels like Christmas.
It is incredibly warm. There's no sight of snow right now in the forecast. We also have Pat Papadeus. Pat, how are you doing?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
You're coming to us from a wall of...
I'm coming from the master plans that have been collecting dust since Joanne Geniak has been elected. And a couple of those books might be fairy tales as well. I'm not quite sure. They're just sort of all there.
That's a deep cut. People will get it if they haven't already gotten it. This is Rose City Politics. Please do support us at patreon.com/Rose City Politics. We're in BizX Magazine and at bizxmagazine.com on all of your favorite social media and podcasting apps. And Rose City Politics has been able to broadcast live on tape thanks to the kind support of Leuna 625 Building Better Communities. Now we are talking about the City of Windsor budget. As I said, it passed on Monday, the 2022 budget with property taxes set to rise 1.86%. That's $59 for the average home and an increase. Now, the budget was initially proposed at 1.99% tax increase. We will get into the change there. Some of the highlights, though, it was a pandemic austerity budget is the best way to describe the conversation around it by some at the table. That's how the media has described it as well. It focused on the fact that there's $25 million in unfunded liabilities stemming from the pandemic and reduction in revenues and fees and levies from the casino, tunnel, airport, and reduced transit ridership. But some capital budget highlights, it's $1.7 billion in spending over the next 10 years, including close to $1 billion on roads and sewers. Now, this was a 9-2 vote in favor of both the capital and the operating budgets. Councillors Chris Holt and Reno Bordelin, wards 4 and 3 respectively, opposed due to a lack of vision for the future of transit. We will be having a whole segment about transit coming up. And Mayor Dilkens, he called this a compromise budget, which I thought was pretty interesting. He said that wards 1 and 6's councillors Francis and Geniak wanted a 0% tax increase, but wards 3 and 4, Bordelin, wanted more spending. So this is the compromise between the two, is how he described it. Now, Doug, I want to come to you first. What's the good, the bad, and the ugly that you saw during this process?
So I think that quote from Mayor Dilkens is a really interesting one, and I also noted it with interest. And I think you can glean a lot from Mayor Dilkens' comments. He started with a number. He wanted to land below 2% for the increase this year. I would suggest to you that that is because this is an election year budget. So the lens that he looks through when he is making these type of decisions is primarily a political one, especially in an election year. Fair enough, politicians are elected officials and they have to be reelected to continue to represent the community. Where I think I differ is that I don't think of this as a compromise budget. I kind of think that this budget is a failure of nerve on the part of Mayor Dilkens. We've seen a number of, I think, important initiatives come forward, whether it is the new transit master plan, and I know we're going to talk about that, or whether it is the Windsor Works report, and we talked all about the process and the flaws in that report. But at the end of the day, that report represents a roadmap for implementation for transforming this region's economy, and I think it's an important one. Council endorsed it. They endorsed the master plan unanimously. They, if my memory serves, they endorsed Windsor Works unanimously. But when it comes to budget time and it comes time to actually put your money where your mouth is and pay for the initiatives that they were so happy to trumpet and take media attention for and get accolades for through the past 4 years, that's when there was a failure of nerve by Mayor Dilkens. And so I would suggest to you that the way to characterize this budget in the big picture is to think of it as a status quo budget that does not display follow through on the elements that this council tried to develop in terms of developing a vision for the city that is new and different. They blinked when it push came to shove.
It's interesting that you put it that way, and I do wonder if, I don't know, you get too much into a fairy tale, and if it wasn't an election year and if it wasn't a pandemic, then what would have happened, right? But we're not able to, I guess, live in that universe. But I don't know about the word compromise myself either, just going back to that right now, because who's really been the ones to ask to compromise? When we get to talk to transit about the route, the rejigging of the Central 3, that's now an increased duration of the trip, right? So who's really being asked to compromise here? Is it a compromise between councillors, or is it the community writ large who was forced to compromise here? And it's, I think, easy to look at it in that sense. It's people, the disconnect that some of the elected officials display when they talk about these matters really becomes apparent. Pat, let's bring you in.
Right, and I agree with you, John. And which segment of our community compromised? I think it's just a fake word, if you will. That's not what's happening here. But I agree with everything that Doug said. I agree with that perspective. I think it's fair to say that there were a lot of really good things in that budget, and ultimately things got tweaked in a way that satisfied. So it's interesting what didn't get addressed. And it always goes back to what we talk about, which is when you take a look at the budget, show me your budget and I'll show you your priorities. And it's really interesting especially when you think about some of the press and some of the marketing, if you will, that came out of the mayor's office in terms of this year of what he promoted and all the good language that he used, but then ultimately, and not just transit. I mean, when it came to issues, on whether we're funding someone to come in for anti-Black racism and certain things, we know that the file was bungled earlier in the year, but there are some other pieces that it's interesting to see. There were compromises, and some people got a little bit more. And in fact, I would say that those counselors that got a little more were the ones that, in fact, were looking to get to zero. We have to for sure think about zero being cuts in services. In fact, this is a cut services, and because of if it doesn't keep up with inflation or what happens, but zero is a cut in services. So, who's he trying to please exactly? I think what Doug said is true. I think there's two things. It's an election year, but he also picked who he felt around the table was most invested in the issue that he was going to screw over.
Always so nuanced there sometimes at the end,
very,
Pat. I love it.
Subtle.
Don?
Well, to follow that up, what Pat and Doug both said is pretty much my comments almost to a T. The compromise on this budget was if you didn't agree with what the mayor wanted, he made sure you compromised on that by not letting any of that go through. I think, as Doug mentioned, we're running into an election, and you have to look at who the mayor's election base is or who his voters base is. And, they're probably not transit riders. They're probably people who golf at Roseland. There's probably people who live outside the core. So, he can focus on those people, obviously, to garner votes in the next election. Even with, look, I'm going to say right now, I would rather have no increased budget because of the lack of priorities the city has shown for years. And, if you're not going to spend our tax money on things that are actually important, then just stop taking my money. That's always been my opinion. There was an expansion of the assessed tax base which increased revenue to the city, I believe by 1.9 or close to $2 million. So even at zero, they would have got a couple million more. But yeah, if if they would spend money on things that, and the whole world can't revolve around me, as much as that sucks. If they would spend things on what I think the community actually needs, I don't think a lot of people would have a problem paying more taxes. But year in and year out for the last, ever since the mayor's term in office, he has shown what his priorities are. They're different than mine. So I'd rather just not give them any money. So knock yourself out. Don't raise my taxes.
You're getting new slides at Adventure Bay, Don.
Well, that's going to come up later, but yeah, I'm very
okay.
excited about that. Yeah, very excited about that.
All right.
They just have to turn it into like a smoking lounge as well. And Don would be the first person there.
100%. See, John, you're thinking outside the box. You should run for election.
They should sell this thing off and, let some operaters figure out ways to make it accessible.
I've been saying for years, we should just burn it down and take the insurance money, but nobody takes me serious when I say that. So
Lucky for you, man.
It's like the Plywood Palace, right? On the riverfront. Speaking of history, Doug, can you set the table here for some historical perspectives for this budget coming into it? I mean, it's not holding the line on taxes. We've now shifted away from that. We've seen that change a little bit here. What's your take on where we're at from where we've been?
Sure. Thanks, John. And I think that it is important to put this budget in perspective because, of course, it comes at the tail end of a lot of history. Back in the 2000s, then Mayor Francis instituted a policy that was branded hold the line on taxes. What that amounted to was a 0% increase for 8 years in a row, which amounts to a tax cut, of course, because property tax is not indexed to inflation like other forms of tax are. So when you hold taxes at zero, you are reducing the buying power of the city. Property taxes are complicated. It is a interaction between the tax rate and the impact assessed value of your home. The city government has not made a commitment on tax rates or the amount of tax that any individual elector pays or to hold the line on fees. What they did over that hold the line era was put a cap on the revenue that a cap on the spending at the city and how much money they would take from taxpayers in order to cover off those costs and expenses. That's essentially what hold the line on taxes meant. In Mayor Dilkin's term in office, we saw that trend change. Frankly, I think it was no longer possible, even for the most ardent conservative, fiscal conservative, to continue to erode the city's buying power year over year. So the new target that Mayor Dilkins has mostly stuck to has been inflationary increases. He always likes to try to come in a little bit below inflation if he can, but essentially we're in an inflationary era for budget increases, and this year was no different. So if you look at the history of the last decade and a half in Windsor, and I think there was a chart presented by administration during the budget meeting. It's on my Twitter feed if you want to take a look at it. That's really illuminating, that shows the gap, the annual $100 million gap between the revenue the city takes now and the revenue the city would have taken with 2% annual increases since the early 2000s. If we had increased taxes with inflation, there would have been $1 billion cumulatively taken from taxpayers that is currently has not been taken. And that $1 billion, now representing approximately $100 million per year gap, will never, ever be made up with inflationary increases. So I think that's a really important perspective when you think about city services and you think about the city budget. If you'll indulge me, I'd also just like to talk about something that you touched on, which is the promotion of the budget and what that says about the budget process.
Actually, before we get to that,
Doug,
Doug, could I just interject something there?
Sure.
During all those times when we had 0% revenue increases, the average taxpayer could have not paid more tax just by the expansion of the assessment base, which wasn't included for years and years and years. So obviously the economy was very different back then. We were going through a recession when the Mayor Francis was around. So, I understand the concept and I was a fan of it. But they didn't need to not include the expansion of the property base, basically from housing, commercial construction, as additional revenue, because it wouldn't affected the quote unquote average taxpayers, because just with the assessment base going up, they could have increased revenue. And they didn't do that either. So it actually amounted to, like you had said, more of a tax cut than anything else year over year to the average homeowner. And, I'll speak personally from, my example. My taxes went down all those years, mainly because when you expand the tax base, you figure out the rate dropped exponentially. So there are minor decreases, but the city could have increased revenue without increasing taxes for the average person, and didn't do that either.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you raised that point, Don, because this year, in the list of cuts, or in the list of ways that the city was able to get to this, under 1.99% increase, was by not expanding revenue in line with the expanding tax base. There's a line in the budget that identifies how much new revenue is coming from assessment growth, just as you indicated. And that money, rather than being plowed into services and assets and maintenance on those assets, it was basically used to cover existing costs. So to me, what that means is that we have an ever-increasing city, ever-increasing population, at least in recent years, but the amount of dollars that we have to provide services and to service all the infrastructure for that growing population, and growing in terms of the number of homes and the number of housing units that are available, that's all growing, but the amount of dollars that we have to spend isn't. So anyway, going back to the promotional tour that the mayor did prior to this budget meeting, the budget, the draft budget, the proposed budget, was released in a press conference. It was provided to City Council, I believe, simultaneous with that press conference on a Friday afternoon. The mayor owned this budget.
One sec.
Yeah.
Do you think that media got it embargoed?
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. Maybe some of our friends in the media would like to comment on that and let us know.
Or maybe somebody wants to FOI that.
Great idea, Pat.
Interesting.
Somebody should do more FOIs in this town.
Somebody should do more FOIs.
The mayor did a tour. He had a hashtag for this budget, hashtag delivering results. And he did a barrage of appearances to promote the budget to different organizations, to the community, and to generate media attention. I would suggest, and I'm making this point because I had a great interaction on social media today with a gentleman who wanted to understand why I said that councillors were too cowed to challenge the mayor. And this is what I mean by that. The mayor has a budget that dwarfs the combined budget of all councillors. He has an office that is well-staffed, and he, of course, himself has a pretty darn good salary, higher salary than John Tory, I might add. But he has all of these resources, including communications resources, that are used to promote the mayor's agenda and to promote the mayor. So in the face of a media barrage, in the face of a concerted and continuing public relations exercise to promote this budget, look, if you're a city councillor sitting around the table, the only way that you are going to stand up to the mayor after a performance like that is if you have an ideological opposition to something in the budget that you just can't stomach. If you think that the budget is going to harm your own political fortunes or harm your residents, which really amounts to the same thing, or if you have a lot of guts and a lot of principles. And unfortunately, My view is that some of the people who supported the budget around the table did so because they really do ideologically fall in line, or at least found it ideologically acceptable. We're satisfied with a modest increase.
Those, sorry to interrupt you, Doug, but those were the ones that he actually said also had to compromise. But in fact, that's not true. Those ones were satisfied with the budget. I'm just going to point out, and if you want, I'll name names or at least name wards. So that too is mischievous and devious in how it was framed. But please go ahead.
Right. But the population of councillors who might be amenable to a more progressive message or have more progressive views or might conduct themselves differently if there were a process that genuinely sought input from council and the community in making the budget, they decided to stay on the sidelines, raise their hand, do the safe thing for their political fortunes. I'm disappointed in that. I'm not surprised, but I'm disappointed. But that's what I meant by cowed. And I do think that the mayor's office and the way the mayor's office is deployed in this city is a problem. It's a problem for democracy. And it's a problem in terms of our ability to get good representation out of council.
I just want to follow up on that and say that I agree. I think that the emails that went out, and that's the other thing, the email distribution list, the hashtag, if that is not political campaigning, election campaigning, I don't know what is. I mean, those of us that have, are been following politics for quite a while, this is it. It's political campaigning. And I think I just want to say, and I don't know, I don't know whether regulations or integrity, council bylaws or anything sort of prevents that from happening. But to me, I just don't know enough. Maybe spend my holiday looking at if somebody knows and is listening, if there's anything there. It just feels unethical to me to be using taxpayers' dollars really for this purpose. And I do agree with you that in many ways there were only a couple really were satisfied and in line with that budget. I think for the most part, the rest could turn a blind eye to what they really didn't want to address and not to rock the boat. I agree that it would take courage and principle in order to do that. To some extent, the way that they parsed out the issue about the 418 also indicated who would step up on that particular issue, even though on the overall budget, there were, two left standing. It was a really interesting night, a very interesting night. And I do want to say, I don't know if our BizX article has come up, but to all our listeners who may, when it comes out, I won't spoil it for you, but I will say this: I already regret the grade I gave the mayor, and I'm sorry, I can't change it now, but just when you look at it, it should be a lot lower than it is. He caught me on a very positive moment when I was writing, and I'm just going to say it right now.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of us who might be regretting the grades we gave to many people around the council table.
There you go.
And fun fact with that hashtag delivering results, the medical lab my proctologist sends me to uses the same thing when they email me the results, delivering results.
Repeat the line.
Thanks.
I think we've had enough of that joke already.
Thanks for sharing that one, Don. Let's talk Transit Windsor. Let's dive into that conversation there on the second half here. Funding is increasing by 4%. We've talked about this on the show, though, already with Councillor Bordelin. Not increasing, that is actually just increasing due to salaries going up and fuel costs going up. So there's no service increase. The 518 X from Tecumseh Mall to Devonshire to St. Clair College has been made permanent. But as we were talking about the 418X, that east-west express route along Tecumseh Road serving the University of Windsor has been killed. That would have been a $1 million annual fee. Instead was a bit of a contentious debate about rejigging Central 3, which is now rerouted to stop at the new Lancer Center with service on Sundays. This comes at an increased cost at $75,000, but in true Windsor fashion, that extra $75,000 reduces the frequency of the route from from 22 minutes increasing to 30 minutes. That's due to the increased distance. Now, we said before at the top, councillors 3 and 4, Bordelin and Holt, were pushing for that $1 million annual spend. They wanted to hire 12 drivers, 6 buses, start the 418X route permanently, as it's the first real step in the Transit Windsor master plan, collecting dust behind Pat right there on one of the rows. That whole plan, again, it's set, the goal is to double service and ridership over a period of 10 years to make it a more sustainable operation. We can talk more about how I think the biggest reason why we're not doing these things is because once you start one of them, you really have to start talking about what the actual fees are of implementing that master plan. And that's a serious conversation. And I don't think that the political will is there from obviously the majority of council right now from what we've been seeing. Councillors Holt and Borderland have both said, though, that they wanted to shift this spending away from $510 million on roads in the coming decade and focus on concentrating more on transit services. One of the other things coming out of this was that the tunnel bus fare was set to be $10, but it was reduced to $7.50. That'll operate as such for next year with the intent of raising it to $10 the following. This is one of those, I mean, I can't get over spending more money for reduced frequency. It's just, I mean, Windsor, we're trying to lure people to move here, and we just keep coming up with the worst branding and slogans. The last real one was what? Sports tourism, which is just a weird thing. Come here with your hockey team for 2 nights and don't venture out of your hotel rooms. There was retirement community, come here to die. Now come here because our transit will cost you more for less every year. It's just, this is just, I don't know, it's depressing. Am I looking at this completely in the cynical way, Doug?
No.
Good.
No.
Well, if you look at it, this actually supports the mayor's statement that, transit's not important, because if we spent an extra 2 million, imagine all the service cuts we'd have to make just to make that number work.
Here's I'll just jump in on this part again. Because the mayor's trying to say that this was a compromise or whatever that is, and looking at the budget from the perspective of keeping the increase low to the number that he has already set in mind, and making sure that he wins that and whatever he had to do in order to get those votes, that in essence, everything, even take a look at how the questions were asked, other than with those that were actually asking on the service, those that looked at transit as an investment in the people and in this community and in the future and in the master plan and all the consultations and in Windsor Works and in the 1 week bloom that we talked about. When you take a look at all of that, when you take all of that and you just look at it from the point of view of what you're going to invest in and what you're going to choose not to invest in. At one point, the show, because it's a show, right? You turn to the treasurer during the meeting and you say, so what would be cheaper? And, lo and behold, shittier service is going to be cheaper. I'm going to do one better to the treasurer. Cut transit altogether. You know how cheap that would be? Whoa, we could save a lot of money. So who you even ask about what should be happening is really, really fascinating in the show of who we're going to ask, so that everybody, whoever is following this can hear how we're going to now rationalize that decision.
Yeah, I thought that debate was fascinating. It was really long, but it was also really interesting. I thought that the performance from the councillors advocating for the new route was pretty impressive, particularly the questioning of the executive director of Transit Windsor elicited some pretty convincing answers in terms of what was possible, what it would cost, and what it would do to transit service, and what the risks to transit were. I was really interested in that debate. I thought it was really valuable. But fast forward to the end of that debate, and I think that the piece that was the most interesting was Councillor Gignac lamenting, and I think Pat alluded to this earlier, lamenting that this transit master plan was being brought forward as something that was actually going to be implemented, instead of just something that was nice, a nice report, we vote for it, we put it on the shelf, and we move on. I don't recall if it was the mayor or if it was Councillor Gignac, but one of them said that this was the first time that a master plan document had a implementation timeline attached to it. And I thought that that was so interesting and so telling. These political documents are not supposed to be taken seriously. And I think that the masterful play by whoever it was who got that implementation timeline inserted into the document, and I don't know who that was, but the masterful play there was taking what is a quote unquote aspirational report. One of the many things, if you look in, the city is going to solve racism, climate change, athlete's foot, everything else you can think of. There's a master plan for it sitting on the shelf, active transportation, but they never get fully implemented because they are quote unquote aspirational documents, which means that they are purely political tools meant to placate people by generating a little bit of media coverage. Look, we care about this problem or that problem or the other problem. But when the rubber hits the road, what we care about is the people who we perceive are going to actually cast ballots, and what they care about and what their priorities are. I think it is fantastic that this master plan has an implementation timeline. And if, in combination with the Windsor Works report, which called out pretty clearly that the thing we have to do if we are serious about diversifying our economy and competing in the 21st century with our municipal peers, the thing we have to do is focus on livability. That's the thing that Windsor needs to do. That is loud and clear in the Windsor Works report that every single councillor endorsed. And yet when it comes time to make the city more livable, and I'm not talking about water slides and canopies, but the things that people need to move around their city and be able to participate in the economy and the life of their city, suddenly they lose their nerve and they don't want to do it. And that's bullshit.
It was a unanimous decision to implement the master plan, and that came with the timeline. So the lamentation it's hilarious. And just to, I guess, piggyback on it just a bit more, it's just this faux fiscal conservatism that we continuously see. I mean, what's the cost of creating these documents? The actual hours that people put into it, the consultants that often get hired. I mean, this is serious cost. And if you just, I'm trying to count up behind you, Pat, the number of master plans there, it's an astronomical figure.
Whoa, John, be careful. If you didn't pay for the Windsor Works report and you turned off the Christmas lights for a year, you'd be dangerously close to being able to afford the 418X.
Right. And even when you think about the 518, the 518 was on the chopping block, if you remember. And the only reason it was saved is because St. Clair College stepped up and they called it a pilot project. You see, so and now we're seeing it's what is it going to take to see that idea, John, of what is it going to cost? What does it cost when we don't invest in the very things that I think, obviously Doug put it really, really well. It was definitely disappointing. I know I said it at the beginning, but let's be clear. These words were used. Joanne Gignac called it a fairy tale. Imagine that, aspiring to bring us from the lowest ranking investment on transit is a fairy tale.
Well, and I think it's important Well, I feel it's important to put this out. And this happens, quite often whenever we hear city councils debating whatever the issue is. There's this false narrative that is used both by the fake fiscal conservatives, as I like to call them, and also on the other side, Reno and Chris, or Councillor Bolt, as we're going to call them. They're going to be our Brangelina, I guess, from now on. And you don't have to cut roads in order to fund a couple of routes, new transit routes. As Pat mentioned at the beginning of the show, we're spending $1 million plus on a stupid slide at the water park, where I think the 418 route was going to come in just over $1 million. So there's that. There's $4 million, I believe, we're going to blow at Roseland to make, Doug's lunch plans look nicer when he goes there for lunch in the clubhouse. So you can have both things. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Even the mayor brought up, well, we don't need this because you can get in a car and drive across city in 15 minutes. Well, yeah, I can get in my car and drive across city in 15 minutes, but people who take transit can't. So you can have both things. You can have an improvement to the roads and infrastructure, and you can also improve transit in the city without cutting anything except, in my opinion, frivolous expenses like, the Roseland development, or there's tons of money there. And again, it's just about priorities. And I don't understand how a new slide at the water park becomes a priority and a new bus route doesn't. And that's
the point,
what we're
Don.
dealing with.
And I guess that's the point that I tried to make before, because choices had to be made. And you don't have to go so far as to say the choice could have been to take it out of roads. You could start going through and say where those choices would be made. The choices could be made to increase, but let's stick with what you're saying. Then it becomes a question of who goes. We come full circle on this discussion, which is where were the compromises? And I'll take this and just nuance it a little bit more, if you will, that, Doug, I agree with you that it's an election year and this is politicking. And there was a view as to who votes, right? But I'm going to just take it and go a little deeper. It's not just who will vote on issues for me, right? But taking a look at how can I also take votes away from councillors that I wouldn't be crying if they didn't make it at the ballot box next time around.
Well, the narrative during the campaign is going to be, if you vote for X, Y, or Z, who the mayor doesn't like, they're going to be big spenders and blow all the money. And it's just like Councillor Bolt, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the political. I mean, it's the same campaign every election. I mean, we've been through, this will be the third one with the mayor, I believe. And it was the same with Mayor Francis too. It's, if you vote for these people, they're going to tax and spend the death out of things. And there are some who will.
I hope that people actually do listen to the debates instead of just relying on what people hear, because I think when you really listen to what the counselor said, what the counselors asked, the positions that they took, but not everyone has time for that. So we sort of just listen. And then it goes back to the mayor's budget, and it's a full-time job for him, and he can get invited to all the radio shows and talk to, who he has access to in the various media outlets to get that message across and frame that issue just that way. And that's a lot of noise to have to cut through to say, but it's not that way. And then the people who are sitting here being critical, and I kind of felt that way in our show yesterday, that I'm a little bit cynical today and feeling it. I feel the same way, but I'm going to say it anyway. And for those keeping score or happen to be playing the game of doing shots when I bring this issue up, whenever I'm on the show, prepare your shot glass now. I remember a debate where the mayor was questioned about the fact that there's no transit infrastructure going to the middle of nowhere where they want to put a mega hospital. There's your shot, everyone, do it now. And I think one of the questions he sarcastically, asked was, are you suggesting that we can't get a bus to run from point A to point B? And we don't have faith. And I'm just going to point it out now. Yeah, I'm going to say it again. I have no faith in the current leadership to be talking about those kinds of things and not plan for the very things that they say they want to accomplish in this community without burning the people who we see lost out in the compromise in the game that they just played.
Yeah, and and again, I'm going to go back to my point earlier. There's a whole bunch of counselors who are very quiet on council. I mean, we hear from Councillor Holt and Councillor Bordeaux, and we hear from the mayor's side, and Councillor Gignac was speaking up a little more than she has lately. There's a lot of other counselors sitting around the table who could be the people going, hey, we can take both these things and make them work, but they don't. And I don't know if that's just the structure of our municipal government, that technically these are part-time people, just don't have time or inclination to actually go about and do the research on these kind of things.
They'll get bullied.
Well, they do, but
they'll get bullied in the media by the more powerful people.
I understand that, but eventually somebody's got to push back, and it can't be the same people all the time. And you can push back from the center on both sides. It's not complicated, but we have weak counselors, plain and simple. They're afraid of the mayor, and justly and rightly so on something, because they know if they go up against him, he's going to go out of his way to make sure that they look bad. It's unfortunate, but that's what we deal with in this city.
Well, we could name names, but the fact is that some of them are just comfortable. It's easier to cruise than it is to come up against any conflict. Playing nice gets you the things that you may have wanted to see. And it is an election year, so why, right? All those factors, which again, I think goes to show how much, and I'm going to use the word again, courage, principle it takes to also have a vision. That's the thing. Like, there's also this was status quo. So, right, in many ways, keeping things the way they are, you can't really say at the same time where we have vision, where we want to put them all on the shelf, and you might as well, because if you're really not going to move towards that, then that's all it is. It's nice talk. And I know that we wanted to talk about the tool itself, though.
Well, we shouldn't call the mayor the budget tool. We should respectfully refer to him as the mayor.
Well, I did want to try to draw a through line between something they're talking when you've just brought up the mega hospital, and there's going to be the cost for the roads there. And we just saw today Mayor Dilkens is in Queen's Park meeting with the Minister of Transportation, bringing up, we need money for these roads. We need money. And what's most interesting was when you see the types of conversations that the mayor has about someone who's more powerful than him, and on the same, ideological side, you would imagine. We've talked about this before. He says regarding the premier, he is so positive about Windsor Essex and wanting to see great things. It's a relationship I certainly value. And then contrast that to what he said to Councillor Holt in regards to this 418X. Councillor Holt, you're on team 418X. I'm on team Windsor. You're darn right I'm not adding an undue tax burden. By subsidizing this route this year, by adding this route this year, you're asking taxpayers to subsidize this route. Well, yeah, who else is going to fund our transit systems? Genius. He goes on to say, this transit thing, guys, had we approved that today, it would have been the worst business decision I have ever seen a city council take in my years. Most people appreciate being able to cross the city in 15 minutes by car, which is why roads are a priority. As the automotive capital of Canada, we're doing all we can to support the automotive industry, and I don't shy away from that. I think that's offensive. What people want. Also, I didn't realize that building roads was our way of saying thank you to Stellantis. Like, are they giving us a quota? Like, we need to see X amount of cement or asphalt dropped, or you're not getting back to second shift. I swear to God.
Well, and sorry, Doug,
it's
just
okay.
one comment, then you go. I'm just saying, and if that's the way he really feels, and obviously he does because he said it aloud, then just stop pretending and paying lip service to this stuff and just be honest. Like, just be straight with people. I don't give a shit about transit.
Right.
I'm not going to put any money into it. We can do all these reports we want. I haven't seen one report come out that said everything's fine, just keep doing what you're doing. So why spend money on those things? Just be honest with people. That's all you want. Then people can vote accordingly. If they don't care about transit, fine, those people will get elected. Just stop lying to people.
this is the problem now. He has to try to like thread this needle moving forward of wanting to implement Windsor Works and be a progressive city that's going to lure people, but at the same time, continually see service reductions if we're not expanding enough by drawing people.
So
It's not that difficult to do, though. All you have to do is use the power of the media that's accessible to you and your, Mayor Drew Dilkin's podium there, and the hashtags and the emails, and spew the bullshit so that people don't actually see it, John.
I really want to make this point, though, because you brought up that John, those comments. And do you think that he had those comments pre-written? Because I don't. Now, this is pure speculation on my part. But when he went into war on the car stuff, I was really interested with that. I think he was both annoyed and rattled. Obviously the vote went the mayor's way. It was the way he wanted it to go, and he has the votes around the table to secure that. But that debate did not go the way that he wanted. I think it really pissed him off, and I think it might have rattled him a little bit, because when the answers coming from administration were professional, neutral, but also not supporting the mayor's perspective on transit, I think that it really rattled him and bothered him. And I know we're going to talk about the procedural stuff, and I wonder how much the Joanne Geniac's brilliant procedural idea, I wonder how pre-planned that was, or whether that was also a result of what had gone before.
He also went personal, and I know you want to go there, so this is the last comment I'm going to make. He also went personal. And for those that will listen to our show for Inside Baseball, I'm going to say this. I would not be surprised if someone who has the mayor's text number during that meeting, who we know in this community goes personal in the worst, disgusting way, wasn't riling up the mayor to make him go that way. That's all I'm going to say on that. Like,
I think I know.
Don't kid yourselves. We see it. It's gross.
Doug, I'll let you move us forward here.
You want me to follow that?
Yeah, I don't want to.
Okay, fair enough. So I think we only have a few minutes left, and I did want to talk about the budget tool. So if you guys will indulge me, I want to go there, and we can do some cleanup after. Okay, we're not going to recover from Don's joke.
We're never going to get over.
We are now calling it
I'm sorry.
the budget simulator. So just so that we can keep the two things straight.
We have a title for the episode.
So I'm going to try to get through this, folks. I really am. The city put out a simulator that allowed residents to slide and manipulate the proposed budget and indicate to the city how they'd like to see things change, whether you'd like to bump up social services a little bit, or maybe cut a little bit from the police and whatnot. That was run for a few weeks in the month of November. To much fanfare. It was well promoted, and then strangely enough, it did not make an appearance except for a very brief mention in the budget report. I thought that was an interesting omission. Councillor Bordelin asked the question of administration, why was the report from the budget simulator not released? And I'm generally positive towards CAO Jason Raynar, and I want to say that ahead of time because I'm extremely not positive about his comments and his reaction. In his comments, Mr. Raynar basically, and he was laughing when he said it, basically indicated that the responses they got from the public in terms of the budget simulator indicated that they didn't really understand what administration does and the value that administration provides, because the budget simulator had the results of the budget simulator. 308 Windsorites participated from all over the city and put their time into providing responses. wanted to see cuts to corporate services. They wanted to see cuts to finance, legal, human resources, the city clerk, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest cut being to, interestingly enough, city council and the mayor's office. That was the largest cut that was proposed by users of the budget simulator. Mr. Rayner wants to say that that's because they're ignorant. I have a different interpretation. I think that the public was given very little information when they were using the simulator. They were not given a lot of information to help them understand exactly what they were doing. But I read this thing and it reads loud and clear to me. In my opinion, what this simulator results say to me, and Councillor Bordelin was kind enough to release them on social media after the city failed to do so, which I would suggest is
Another issue.
Well, however much you want to laugh about the results, I would suggest that not including that in the report is I don't know how it happened or why it happened, but whatever the reason, that is poor stewardship. You really, really owe people the courtesy and the respect when they take the time to fill in a survey to include the results of that survey in the report from administration. I don't think there's any excuse that's acceptable on that. Just one sec. I want to give a quick overview of the results of the simulator and provide my analysis, if you don't mind. The biggest cut made by users of the simulator was to police budget, 4.15%. Other services that were cut, I mentioned, also a cut to capital projects and reserve funding. Here is the increases that were recommended by users of the simulator. Ready? Social housing, children's services, long-term care, health services, roads and infrastructure, employment and social services, EMS, recreation and culture, transit service, parks, environment services, economic development, information technology, you go guys, libraries, building services, planning and engineering. Those are the things that residents said, hey, I value this. Okay, I value this and I want more of this. But in the big picture, what I take from this, interpreting it, is that residents do not think that adequate services are being delivered by their city. Otherwise, all of these departments would not see an increase. Residents want better services. Residents don't understand why they're paying so much for corporate services when the services that they are actually getting suck so bad. And residents think the police budget is bloated. It all sounds rational to me, and none of it sounds like anything that the CAO of the City of Windsor should be laughing about. Mr. Rayner, do better.
You bring up a good point, right? I mean, it was a balancing act to use that tool, right?
Yep.
So where there's a cut on one side, as you were making clear, I think your observation is perfect. To see the increase on the other side, you couldn't express that just through tax increase, right? It was all one side or the other side.
Oh no, you could increase taxes and actually.
But what to what amount though? Sorry.
Well, you could increase
maximum legal.
You could increase or decrease the department's budget by 10%.
By up to 10%. Okay.
And I think
I remember
to be fair, it's important to mention that overall, the users of the simulator recommended a slight decrease in taxation overall. And I think that's important context as well.
Well, and some of the things that you said there align with, priorities that this mayor and many members of council have shown. Surprising to see roads and sewers so high up when it comes to some of those other services. But I remember when we first talked about this budget tool, when it came out, that I said, do you think that this thing is going to be used at all in any purpose? And there was significant pushback against me on the panel saying, of course it will be. If these results are generated, who's going to go into a meeting like this without listening? Like, well, I feel pretty good in my cynicism on that one, that the results came in, they didn't show what they were supposed to show, and they were suppressed. And the fact that it had to come out through a city councilor really speaks to the issue. It's just, it's depressing, and the laughter about it is not a good movement forward. But do we want to talk about that procedural issue, Doug?
Well, we've only got a couple minutes left to talk. Some of us are going to time out very shortly, but essentially, the budget report had been reviewed and it was time to start working through the budget, the operating budget in detail, Councillor Gignac made a motion to simply accept the budget at the 1.86% tax increase and move on. This came at the tail end of hours of heated debate, heated and very challenging debate. There was an appetite around the table to simply raise their hands and move on and move on to the capital budget. There was a lot of confusion, which is why I think that this may have been a hasty and knee-jerk reaction. There was an awful lot of confusion. People didn't seem to know what was going on. I have to say, after so many years in the chair, the mayor does not do a good job running a meeting. And that's, I just don't understand how he can let things become so chaotic for so long. It was over 20 minutes of wrangling around what the process would be. The other thing that I wanted to say about that real briefly, so that others have a moment to get in, is that our budget process is already broken. It already is a little bit absurd. It all happens in one day. It's this marathon meeting. There's very little time for reflection. When we pay councillors and the mayor to make decisions, we pay them to reflect, to consult, to think, to meditate, and to cast their vote with the fullness of all of that thinking and consulting. And that's the opposite of the process that we already had. And this made it even worse. Other communities stretch their budget process out over days or weeks. And I think that would be better. And this is a really, really disappointing and crappy process. And Councillor Gignac should be ashamed, because as the most experienced councillor around the table, she should be setting an example and not playing silly games like that.
Well, that's because you're assuming that there's respect for the budget process, and there's respect for engagement, and respect for consultation, and respect for actually the taxpayers, besides saying what you think the taxpayers expect, which is not to raise their taxes. So I agree with you, but I think that you are giving actually too much credit in thinking that everyone is coming at it from really the lens in which we should be looking at our municipal government and any sort of democratic decision-making body.
Well, and I think it's, this is nothing new. You put out a budget simulator like that. The reality is most people want more and don't want to pay for it. That's just the way the world works. That's going to be on any level of politics. So when you do a budget simulator, what's important is to see what actually increases. There's a lot of hard costs that you're never going to be able to cut, especially from, budgets like finance and legal and stuff like that. So it's disappointing that, Mayor Budget Tool and his CEO assistant there laugh it off at, the residents who participate in this just aren't smart enough, or they're too dumb to understand how this works. So it's just dismiss them and carry on with the way we've always done things. I expect it from the budget tool, but I don't expect it from, the new CEO is probably, you would think, trying to, ingratiate himself in the community to just laugh it off like, well, the residents are idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. It's sad. It's disgusting, to use one of Pat's terms.
Well, just to be fair, to some extent, I mean, there may have been reasons why, how long the tool was available, how stimulating
I think he's
stimulator,
going on his third term.
no, but really, but that could have been explained why. But maybe the answer is, look, it may not have been rolled, we may not have rolled it out as well as we could have. And however, in the future, there could have been some other things there. Anyway, I know we're running out of time. I know that I am. I personally feel a lot better. I feel like I got some stuff off my chest. I don't know about you guys.
I like coming to these,
which is what it's all about. Let's face it.
I like coming to these weekly therapy sessions. It's all
there you go. Like to get my stimulator tools all taken care of right there.
Well, I was just gonna wrap up with Doug. If you see silly tales being spun, expect to hear fairy tales as well from the same person. That would be the last point I'd add on it. This has been our show on the 15th of December. We'll be back next week. We're gonna be Santa Claus just before Christmas, and we're going to be judging who's naughty and nice with our council report card. And we'll get to that, and then you'll all have a holiday. So tonight was fun. Our regular panel included Doug Sartori, Pat Papadeus, Don Merrifield Jr., and myself, John Lidkey. Please do support us at patreon.com/Rose City Politics. We are in BizX Magazine, online at BizX Magazine, on all of your favorite podcasting and social media apps, and Rose City Politics broadcast live on tape thanks to the kind support of Leuna 625, building better communities. We will see you next week on the 23rd of December, folks.